All right. So, hello, everybody. My name is Katherine. I'm a member of the AutoCrit editing team and a longtime member and a writer, and I'm so excited. And I've been muted. Sorry, everybody. So, hello, everybody. I'm Katherine. I'm a member of the AutoCrit editing team and a writer, USA Today bestselling dark fantasy author, and a longtime developmental editor. I'm so excited to be here with all of you and just talk about what is your genre and why you need to know what the genre is and what to do with that information once you figure it out. So we got a lot to cover in this hour. I want to be just very open and welcoming to everybody that this is a beginner's welcome class. So if you have never written before, you're just thinking about it for the first time, this is for you. And if you have been writing a long time and you're thinking about crossing into a new genre, or you're not sure where your niche is, then this event hopefully will help you get some clarity on that as well. And really, in the end, what to do with this information. Because while it's nice to know what a genre is, we also need to know why we're using it. Why do we even care? So we're going to do all that today. And this is a demo of how to use the tools you already have built into your AutoCrit account in order to identify that genre and reader expectations for that genre. So with that, let's dive right in with what is genre? A genre is a category that a reader is going to look for when they are searching for a book. Most of us have been readers longer than we have been writers, right? And we read for fun, for education. But when you walk into a bookstore and you look up at the ceiling for the big banners, those are genres: fantasy, science fiction, cookbooks, self-help books, religion, textbooks. All of those are what we would call a genre. In industry terms, these are also called, term is used uh, interchangeably. So a broad category or a main genre is going to be what we call a parent genre, the big picture level. Within each of these big genres are what we call subgenres. And we're going to look at what those are here in just a second. So how many of you already know or have a good idea of what your main genre is, where your book would be if it was in a brick and mortar bookstore? If you know, go ahead and drop it in the comments. We're going to see what kind of genres we have represented. And you'll notice that I did include nonfiction like self-help, because in the industry, the term, again, genre and category are used interchangeably. So if you write literary fiction is a genre. If you write self-help, that would be your genre for the sake of publishing. So we're not going to get too bogged down with the semantics today, but I want you guys who are newer to know that both the terms mean more or less the same thing, and are used in very similar ways. We've got several different ones represented here and more people coming on. So you got fairy tale, crossing from romance to mystery or horror. That is a nice shift, romance to horror right there. Urban fantasy, mixed, adventure, murder mystery. You're not sure if it counts as cozy because there are some ordinary people involved, as well as police set around a leisure center, but for murders. Romance, YA coming of age. Finishing up your second draft. And we're going to get into the AutoCrit analysis in a bit. Thank you for warming us up, saying that the AutoCrit analysis deemed it literary for the first scene or two, then called it contemporary. We're going to get into why that is. Literary fiction, young adult and urban, historical fantasy. Rose, fellow dark fantasy here. Historical thriller, horror. Lots of good YA represented today. Great to see some YA people on today. Science fiction, sword and sorcery, medical thriller. Nice. Historical fiction, self-help. So we have got a very broad mix. There's everything from children's books to dystopian fantasy to horror, all intertwined. And then we got our new adult, young adult. Great. So all across the board. for today. Now, because you could easily do classes in detail on every single genre, we are not going to be going through every single genre today and what those trademark points are. We do have lots of genre related events that AutoCrit leads. We would love for you to check the calendar. We have clubs coming up for the next 2 months, like action adventure, writing memoirs. I think there's one for humor coming up in the academy. So we got a lot of different things going there. We are going to be looking at the bigger picture themes. We're going to be approaching what our genre is based on our book's theming, our book's target audience, and our book's target age today. All right. So let's talk about categories. We're going to get a little technical here. A category versus a subcategory. And the easiest way that I know how to do this when you first start out is, instead of getting lost in the mire of what we call the BISACs, the industry's huge list of hundreds and hundreds of subcategories or subgenres that can be in a book, go to Amazon.com, go to Draft to Digital, go to a retailer that charges you nothing to list your book for self-publishing. You don't have to list a book to do this. Click Create a Book. And on the first page, the Create Details page, you will see these drop downs. These are the industry's current primary genres. Amazon is more restricted than some niche ones like Kobo and Draft to Digital's broader spectrum. So I recommend usually starting there. But look through those broad genres. Broad genres are going to be the biggest possible net of readers that could potentially like your book, right? So in this example, you'll notice that we have everything from nonfiction, arts and photography, to biographies and memoirs, business and money, comics and manga, foreign language and lit. These two screenshots are all there is in Amazon today, as of when I screenshotted this morning. There's nothing else. If your book's genre is not listed on this list right here, it is not in a primary genre. So what you might have defined is either a subgenre under one of these fields, or it's a trope that you can use to market as part of your marketing materials, like your blurbs or your synopsis. But when you go to publish, you're going to have to pick. If you're going to put it up on Amazon KDP, one of these fields is your primary genre. So for me, writing fantasy, my broad genre is sci-fi fantasy. Coincidentally, that's also the main genre I'm going to have if I try to put my book in Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or whatever your local brick and mortar store is. Inside there, we then have subgenres. Subgenres are called subcategories. There are whole lists of those. Within the subgenre, there are even smaller niches, okay? So on the left-hand side on this screen, you see the box that says subcategory. So once you pick your primary genre, I clicked literary fiction, literature and fiction, as the primary genre here. Then underneath that, there's a subcategory you can choose from there, and you can go down and say, this is literary foreign language, this is genre, this is historical fiction, and then you're going to choose one of those things. So my historical fiction writers, my women's fiction writers, you guys are still being published under subgenres right now, under a different genre. I know there's been a lot of work to change genres. So this is something just to keep in mind when you're marketing or when you're looking for an agent specifically, that if they don't say, I'm looking for women's fiction, it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't open to representing women's fiction, but it might mean that you need to find their parent genre, your primary genre within which your women's fiction falls, and then submit it to that agent, right? So go to literary, people requesting literary fiction, go to their wish list, and these agents have wish lists, and they say, I'm looking for literary fiction books with these themes, with these subgenres. That is where you're going to find a lot of these points. Now, for comparison, I did shift over to Draft to Digital because, as I said, Draft to Digital has almost all the BISACs to my knowledge. So they have a much broader spectrum than Amazon KDP. But even in Draft to Digital, the categories start out very broad, and then you have to go down underneath them. So under contemporary, there's dark fantasy, there's dragon mythological creatures, and things like that too. So, or sorry, those are subgenres under fantasy. So fantasy is the broad genre, That's my genre. Underneath it, my subgenres are dark fantasy, dragons, mythical creatures, and epic. Yours could be contemporary or action adventure or fiction, but those are the sub. So I'm going to pause here for a second and answer any questions that you guys have. There are hundreds, again, of subgenres, so it's not that I have every single genre memorized, but we can pull them up and work through them if we need to here. Your eyes keep gravitating toward absurdist. I don't really write or read absurdist fiction much, so I can't speak to all of their common themes, but typically, what's a good example? Oh, do you remember the movie that had all the mythical, it was the Emporium, something magical Emporium. I think it was published under absurdist. I'd have to go back and look. Cozy is a type of a genre. So you can have cozy fantasy, you can have cozy mystery. Cozy just means general theming that goes with it. So in a cozy mystery, you're going to have a mystery where it's typically about a small town amateur sleuth, and that sleuth is trying to solve this crime. And maybe they're doing it to help the authorities, but a lot of times they're not. They have a different interest involved. It typically has a lighter feel. It doesn't get as gory or grim as a murder mystery can by itself. And it typically has a happy ending. Think Nancy Drew. Cozy fantasy is where you know all the main cast of heroes are going to live in the end. Um, or if they don't live in the end, it's going to be very skimmed over, sort of like in The Hobbit, where not all the dwarves live, but you don't really focus on that for more than a couple paragraphs. It's not going to be very gory or graphic. It can tend to lean into the noble, bright fantasy theming, which is basically we're going on this quest or this adventure, we're going to save the world, and it has a lighter tone and feel to it overall. And I know we could be here all day asking what all these things are. So I am going to come back to some of these questions at the end. And if we don't get to the answers to these specific questions that I'm waiting on, we'll answer them at the end. You can drop them there for me. Um, Horror with psychological and supernatural themes still. Horror, you could definitely put it in horror unless it's more of a thrilling pacing, page turning thing, and then it would be maybe a supernatural thriller, because thrillers can have horror elements too. So which is more prevalent? Are you writing in the piece solely to scare, shock, or disgust the reader, and then the plot comes in second to help achieve that goal? Because if that's the case, it's horror first and foremost. If the horror are just elements that feed into a deep plot or deep character growth, you may have shifted over into psychological thriller, and then you have your horror elements. Love people already going to Google. Romantasy. Okay, my romantasy people. I see you. I understand the frustration. I know I've chatted with some people recently about this. Romantasy is not a genre. It's also not a subgenre. Fantasy romance under fantasy and then romance is a genre. Or you can have romance and then have fantasy under the romance genre. So it depends on which one is more prevalent. When I put out Splitting Dawn, I put it out as a romance first and then subgenre fantasy, because the romance was the more central thing to the plot, and then the fantasy was second. But when I put out The Violet Twisted Fate, the romance was sort of important, but it was not the primary theme of the goal. She could have been on the same journey without a love interest, and the book still held itself. So in that one, I listed it as fantasy first and then chose romantic as the subgenre under fantasy, if that makes sense. So ask yourself, if you take the romance out, is there still a answer is yes, you probably have fantasy genre romance underneath. If the answer is no, this book can't exist unless there's this romance, then you might have romance first and then your fantasy underneath. Becca, if you're still on, do you have anything to add to that point?
About romantasy.
Yeah. And like the
It's
genres when you're putting it up.
yeah. So I mean, I'm writing romantasy as well, and so I look at what is the key point, I think, and that's kind of what you said, is like, for me, if I'm writing one that is, for example, primarily fantasy based with a smaller romance love plot, then that's going to be the fantasy first and then romance. But when I'm advertising it on Instagram and to my list, I still use romantasy because that's what is a common term for the readers. Did that make sense? I feel like I may
Yeah,
have just
yeah,
explained that poorly.
yeah, absolutely. By autobiographical fiction. So if it's autobiographical, then it is probably not fiction, because autobiographical means it's somebody's real life story. Now, if it's fiction pretending to be someone's biography, then it could be whatever the primary genre that is, right? So if I'm reading Katniss Everdeen's story about her life, or a good one would be Interview with a Vampire, because it is literally his biography, but it's completely made up. There's no fact to it at all. It was published as horror, I think, and now I think it's see it in dark fantasy some too, by Anne Rice. So the primary genre would go first, and then you have the fact that it's written in an autobiographical style. But if it's fiction, then it can't be true. And then there's some creative nonfiction. And what creative nonfiction is where you take a real life story and you have to add in elements that may or may not be true. Basically, if it's over 40 years, you probably have it in historical fiction. If it's within the last 40 years, then you can try to put it in creative nonfiction, which is I have this person's life. I know the majority of what happens, but I'm filling in the blanks because I don't know what happened there and there's no records of it for those blanks. And so it's now creative. I've come up with certain elements, but all the core things are absolutely true. So it depends on the nature of the story, I guess. And there's a good point, Owen. Okay, so going back to our categories one time here. Full list. Do you see children's books listed on here or middle grade listed on here? And this is one of my biggest pet peeves from a publishing perspective, that there is a teen and young adult category, but there is not a children's or middle grade primary genre. That means that those age groups are being classified as either a subgenre or as an age group, and they're not even listed on the genre list at all. So when you're doing comparisons and things like that, and you're looking for marketing, you're going to have to pick a place. Most of us would put our younger books within the main genre it is. So if I'm writing children's fantasy, I'm going to go to the fantasy genre. And then under fantasy, I'm going to click something that's relevant, action, adventures, dragons, whatever it is. And then on Amazon, there's a space to put the age groups for children's books. So we're going to look at that in this presentation. I have a slide for you showing what that looks like. And that is how you're going to determine, for the sake of the algorithm and the readers, that your book is middle grade or children's. It's not going to usually be a standalone genre by itself. And yes, I know that makes it more complicated, but it just is the way it is. And it's even more frustrating that new adult is officially a subgenre, right? So if you go into Amazon and you write new adult like I do, you can go to fantasy and you'll see new adult as a genre. You can click on the side, a little subgenre. But you don't always get that for middle grade, right? So brick and mortar store categories are the way, like I said earlier, that if you're first going into what is my genre, back out. Ask yourself, I walk into a bookstore, I'm looking at the walls, I'm looking at the ceiling with the hangers. What is the category I'm going to if I want to find my book? That is your main genre. Try to sort of stick in that area when you're setting it up.
Can I
Now, for
pop
the
in
sake of us
really
writing
quick?
and everything, we're going to go deeper. And Becca, did you have something to add on to there?
I would say that with new adult, especially in the romance genre, then that is where, you would put a lot of your college romance and things like that. So the spice levels, if you write spicy, you're going to have a little bit of that shift between the young adult YA and the new adult spice levels as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So we've been focusing very heavily on marketing sides because the number one purpose of a genre so far has been to market your book. We don't pick up a book or story and usually write with a genre in mind, at least not when we first start writing. We might develop that later on, especially if you're someone who likes to write to market, which means you look at the market that's trending and selling books right now, and you write a book in order to chip in a little bit, get some of that money, get some of those readers. But a lot of us have a story in mind and we write the story and we're trying to figure out the genre later. And the genre is meant to help you to find where your readers are. What do they want? If they're going into a store, where are they going to look? If they're on Amazon or Kobo or Barnes and Noble or Apple Books, what are they going to type in to find your book, right? So that is one of the biggest reasons we have opened there. But there are writing and editing implications for picking a genre too. And that's what we're going to focus on next. We're going to do this by saying again, where does our book fit best? This is what we're looking for by joining this class, by looking through all of these confusing categories and then subcategories and making the gut-wrenching decisions about where to put books that don't have the ideal one that you were hoping for, right? Before you dive too deep, before you get in the Googling rabbit hole, I'm going to say, wait, come back. Let's approach this from a big picture level objectively. So let's start with the ideal age range, since we were just talking about that. What is the ideal age range for your readers? And I remember putting out Vow, my first book, and thinking to myself, I want everybody to read it. And I actually told my mentor that. I think that this is one of those fantasies that could be read by kids, that could be read by teenagers, that could be read by their parents, and there'd be something for everybody. And she was like, that's really great. And it's a really romantic idea. But if you market to everybody, you'll sell to nobody. And I've heard similar sentiments from other industry professionals since then. I've heard it from agents since then. And it is so true. You need to have an idea for your ideal reader. That doesn't mean that your book is limited to only them. The fact that they put out Percy Jackson to be a young adult doesn't mean that the only people who've ever read the Percy Jackson series is young adults. The fact that they put out Harry Potter to be children's doesn't mean that the only people who picked up Harry Potter have read it as children's. People who read ACOTAR who are adults, right? But it gives you a clear place to start. If you had one age group of people, what age would those people be? That will then change the genres that you have available to you when you go to publish. So let's talk about what those age ranges are. Right now in the US market, and in the UK market, middle grade is either going to be 8-year-olds to 12-year-olds if you're in the US, or 10 to 12-year-olds if you're in the UK, depending on the publisher. Young adult is 12 to 18 years old, and that is a very big range. And it's important to note that because our version of who a young adult is varies by person. Every single person's like, well, when I was 13, you guys, I was 16 when I started, when I graduated from high school. And so for me, I'm like, oh, new adult, it's like 16 and up. But in actuality, these are broad categories to get your books in front of the most people they can who might be interested in them. That's why they're so broad. 12 to 18 is the current young adult standard. New adult is now 18 to 23, and trade is 18 plus. And trade just means general audience. Adults typically, or people in general can pick it up and read it, right? And you can tell the differences in your story several different ways. We're going to get into this later on, but we're going to judge this based on the level of description you have of your gore, of the sex on the page, how much profanity you have on the page, and the theming. The character age doesn't determine the age group of your readers. That's a very common myth. I've pointed this out many, many times. Carrie by Stephen King has a young adult aged main character, and in no way is that a young adult book. It is an adult novel, and it is not marketed into young adult demographics, although young adults can pick it up, right? And then conversely, The Hobbit, none of those people are young people, but it was marketed and is still being published as a children's and or young adult book, depending on the country. And that is because of the themes. Bilbo Baggins is finding out who he is. In a way, it's his coming of age story, even though he's already an adult. So the theming, and again, the level of gore, level of profanity, level of sex that you show on the page is going to determine those age ranges a lot of times. And then look into the theming itself. After you find out your ideal age range, think about other characteristics of your ideal audience. And we call this building an avatar. So think about, I know that I have a young adult audience for this book, or I know I have an adult audience for this book. What do they like? What are their interests? What other books are they reading? By which other authors? And one of the ways that you can find some of this information, if you never thought about it, is go find a similar author to you and check out their social media pages. When I started this, I was like, I don't know what to post. And my mentor's like, well, what do you write? Like, well, at that time, it's like sort of like Holly Black meets Brandon Sanderson meets George R. R. Martin. She's like, well, go to their social media pages. What are they chatting about? Because they are staying connected to their readers because they want to sell them books, which means they want to be relatable. So what do their followers like? Take a look around at some of the people with public profiles. Don't be creepy. Don't stalk people. Don't private message people. That's sort of weird. Just take a look at who's following them. What age group does this look like? What interests do they have? And I came up with a list of things that my readers had in common with me that created sort of that avatar, that I know that a lot of the people who read my books and like them love that old-timey epic fantasy feel. They love adventures, or at least the idea of adventures. We talk about cooking a lot. We talk about pets a lot. So if you hang out on my social media pages as a reader, that's the kind of content I'm going to post about when I'm not talking about my books, because I want to be both real, that's part of my life and part of what I love, but also relatable. So what is your ideal age range? Who is your ideal audience? And then you narrow down the genre to add it and tie it all together so that you have your big marketing picture all set up, right? So you're going to narrow down that genre, as we said before, based on your writing style, your themes, and your depth of description, as well as your tropes. And we're going to go through all of these things, and I'll show you how to find them in AutoCrit so you don't have to like rack your brain over it. This is agonizing. Before I pull up AutoCrit, we're going to pause. I'm going to catch up on questions, and then we'll dive into the AutoCrit side. Let's see, we've got a lot on here. You have a friend who's writing an adult novel, but the main character is a kid, so it's tough. That is super common, especially in darker genres. Think about The Road. One of the main characters is a child, and it is also one of those really graphic, gory, dark books. Again, it comes back to the theming, and it comes back to the aura of the scene as a whole, because there's a misconception that I can't relate to a character unless they're my age. But most of us have been children, right? So most of us can relate with what it would have been like to be a child. Therefore, it's not the fact that we can't relate to having been through that experience as much as how relevant is this to me? Yes, I've been a child, but why do I still care? Why do I still want to read this? Why do we have grown men and women reading and loving young adult fiction? And a lot of that's because of those themes, that there's hope in the world, that there's good in this world worth fighting for, that you have a purpose, things that keep us going when we feel down, right? Nonfiction readers, your genre audience is more important in some ways than even fiction readers, because you have to market to a very specific niche to get your books in the hands of the audience you're trying to help, especially my self-help people, my education people, and my business people. You are writing any of those kinds of books, you need to have a very clear audience. Yes, your book could possibly help everybody, but if there is one person it would help the most, who is that person? And then spend your time marketing to that person and choose categories that fit the book that that person would be looking for in the end. Let's see. Talking about genres some more. Yeah, target demographic versus the periphery demographic. Now, you're not going to find romance under thriller. I don't know if there's thriller as a subgenre under romance. You might see romantic suspense more than thriller. But
I
if
just looked.
you,
It's
I'm
just
sorry,
suspense. I just looked. It's just suspense.
just suspense. So if the thriller aspect is your primary genre, in a case like that where there is not an option to put it there, I would choose thriller And then I would go to romance and pick the applicable romance as your second or third genre, because most of these retailers and publishers are going to let you put 2 or maybe even 3 categories. So on Amazon right now, you can pick 3. You have 3 categories. I write dark/grimdark, new adult, mythological, fantasy. So when I go in, I go to fantasy and I click new adult. That's the first primary one. That's my target age. And then I go in and I click fantasy, dark. That's my second. That's my main genre and main subgenre. So I got age, main subgenre and genre. And then third, I have the little niche trope that stands out the most. The fact that there are going to be lords and goddesses and all these supernatural divine elements in here and mythology, that is going to be under literary, under mythological. So I've now got 3 independent categories, and together they put my book in front of 3 very different audiences who all will probably like them for different reasons. Okay. Could I have your opinion on my genre? Mine's dystopian and has some sci-fi elements. There's no magic, but I think I'm going with dark fantasy. So sci-fi, I think dystopian's under sci-fi. But I would definitely pick sci-fi as one of those 3 for sure. I wouldn't do fantasy unless you have fantasy elements. So if you have fantasy races, fantasy world building, a magic system, fantasy is basically going to be anything that can't be explained by science. Now you can do genre bending. I have seen a book about vampires in outer space. That is a genre bend. You have clear vampire lore and all of that tied into a spaceship, right? Vampires in outer space, and it is techy as everything, and it had the sci-fi language. It is okay to have bent genres and to have more than one distinct genre, but make sure that both audiences are going to be happy. Don't put something in fantasy if there is 0 fantasy elements really to it, because then if a dark fantasy reader, if I pick it up and I read it, I was like, why is this a fantasy? It's all just sci-fi. Then I could be disappointed. And you don't want to get potentially negative reviews for something that you didn't do anything wrong. It was just put in front of the wrong person, right? Um, yeah, Hunger Games is about kids, but it gets deep and dark. Okay, I think I've about caught up with everything. You're writing a science fiction, young adult, new adult range. Should it be science fiction first as main genre? Yeah, that's where it would typically be for new adult. Now, that's the other element to doing this. You can't have both YA and new adult on your books right now. There's a lot of shift in the industry to protect minors because, again, young adult goes all the way down to 12 years old. New adult, you can have sex on the page, you can have cursing on the page, you can have substance abuse graphically on the page. Young adult, that's being censored out a lot more by the trad publishing industry right now. So if you go to publish your book on Amazon today, you can't pick an adult or new adult category if you have picked a young adult category as a genre. So you have to either pick young adult genres only or new adult/adult genres only. And in your case, if you have new adult content, I personally suggest putting it in the adult and new adult because young adult readers do pick up new adult pieces. It's going to depend on the individual reader. But if you do young adult, you're going to be locking out all those others. All right. So let's get down to narrowing down what's in our book. So we know how we're determining these things. Of course, you can have an idea of your book and try to come up with this avatar on your own and then use this to try to pick the genre on your own, right? But AutoCrit has tools to try to help you guys so that this can be easier. I wish that we had had these when I was first picking my books for self-publishing because that was the most agonizing part. For me, I knew it was fantasy and I was prepared for that broad genre. What I didn't know was that there was all the subgenres. And I was like, where do I even begin? Where do I even put this book? There are so many subgenres that this could be under. And now we have the story analyzer, and that's what we're going to look at today. So here are two of my books. This is the before published version of the books. If you open your book in AutoCrit, you're going to go out here to AutoCrit, start all the way at the beginning here. Here's your AutoCrit page. You're going to go to the writer's desk on the left-hand side, and you're going to open a book if you already have one running, or you are going to upload your file. You can do that by clicking upload, and then you should get a box that says, hey, upload this file. You can upload it in an unformatted, image-free docx file, .txt file, or .rtf file. You're going to put your file in here if you've already written it, or go ahead and write your story from scratch. Once the story is in, here we are, you're going to go up to the top toolbar, and you're going to click on the chapter dropdown. This is right here in the middle. You're going to pick auto find chapters. If your book used the word chapter in your chapters, it should identify all those chapters for you. If you did not, so you guys know I'm writing one right now for the Novel 90 Writing Challenge. Here's an excerpt of that, where I don't even have my chapters defined yet. I only have scenes. So I am labeling scenes without chapter numbers so that I can come back and drag and drop them to reorder them wherever I want them later, right? I can move this here, move that down, highlight this, the name of the scene, the name of the chapter, and click the plus sign at the top, and you can save it to add it as a chapter. Once you have your chapters identified, you can then run the analyzer. That's going to be under the analysis tab. You can pick fiction for fiction. You can run this nonfiction for nonfiction. But we are going to go in here, and for the sake of finding our genre, look for a few key places. So first, on the overall tab in the middle, you're going to scroll down to the very end where it talks about your book's genre overall. The analyzer is not connected to what you have over here where my hand is right now, your selected genre for the technical editing reports in AutoCrit. AutoCrit has two different kinds of reports. We have developmental for your content, your plot, world building, things like that. That's what this analyzer is for. And then you have technical for your line editing, developmental editing, and copy editing. That's going to help you with your flow and your readability and your grammar and things like that. The comparing with genre and author report is where you choose what genre or author you're trying to write similar to. And it says, if you're trying to write similar to this person or similar to this genre, that you would typically have this many adverbs. You would typically have sentences that are this many words long on average and things like that. The beauty of the analyzer is that it doesn't care what you put there because it is reading your book like an objective beta reader, and it is going to tell you, like an objective and good beta reader would, that it doesn't really matter what you meant for it to be. What it reads like is this. So this is genre conformity, and it says this text best fits with high fantasy. And then it's going to give you reasons why. It has elaborate world building across multiple dimensions, magic users, mythical creatures like dragons, imps, centaurs, and dwarves, epic quests, significant stakes, demonic entities threatening the entire world's existence. All of these are things that I would have had to try to pick out of the book by myself if I had not had this to just read it and then tell me what is there. Now, it does point out that there are some chapters that shift that expectation. So here is that romantasy question we talked a little bit about earlier. Certain segments focus heavily on romantic aspects, especially dealing with these people. And they move closer to contemporary romance and fantasy blend. Because the primary is fantasy and it only says the romances side, if I'm on the fence about it, I am probably going to say that's my cue to list it as fantasy as the main genre, romance as the side genre. I've also had this point out stories that are not supposed to have any romance at all. And then it'll say because of the relationship between this person and this person. And I go, oh no, where did I mess that up? I'm going to go back to the chapters tab, and you can see a genre level on every single chapter of your book. Genre 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Here's my genre that book reads like, and I'm going to do a search for the word romance. And every single time the word romance comes through, I'm going to note it and say, speaking of which, I need to go back and get rid of the romance here. There shouldn't be romance here. They are cousins, and one is happily married, and they are literally just working together. That's all it should be there. I have no hidden things. And then you can take it out and you can fix it. And if you find your book isn't romantic enough, you're trying to write a romance first, you can do the opposite. Go through here and say, hey, there's no romance mixed in chapter 1. Nothing about this says romance. What can I do to add in maybe a meet cute, the first main point of a romance novel when the couple sees each other for the first time and meets for the first time? Maybe they get asked out. Maybe they think about being in a relationship more. Maybe there's things I can do to hint that that's coming so that my reader doesn't pick up the book and not get it as what it is and skip on, right? So my book doesn't read like drama instead of a romance, or suspense instead of a romance, if that's what I had meant for it to be, is romance first. So this is all going to be here, and you can do that chapter by chapter just to get a good feel. The first chapter is the most important for your querying because often that's the chapter that shapes the agent's expectations of how you write. So you are making a promise to readers of how your book's going to feel and what you're setting up for them in the story. And then for an agent, you're also setting up for them their expectations for your writing style. So it should be clear in your first chapter what genre you're writing. And that is the primary place that I start overall, and then go to my chapters and look at chapter 1. What genre does that read like if someone's picking this book up for the first time? This chapter is fantasy. And then again, it tells you why. Medieval setting, magical abilities, mysterious phantasms, prophecies, so on and so forth. And that's why it is best for this in this chapter. So it will give you tropes, examples, and things like that. Now, it's not going to give you target audience as much. You are going to have to lean a little bit more on yourself for that. But if you write dark and grimdark, then you'll see this genre change to the graphic horror elements, and the analyzer can get super, super niche. In my vampire apocalypse, it was like, this is a grimdark vampire apocalypse Western novella with several horror elements and undertones. It's like, that is extremely niche. A Western, I didn't even know Western fantasy was a thing until the analyzer spat it out. And then I went on, I was like, oh yeah, that's a subgenre under fantasy. That's fantastic. I haven't listed it as a Western because it's not supposed to be. That wasn't my intention. But it can be very specific, and it will give you much more detail than if you had just told it, I want it to be this. And the reasons that it says here are good places to start where if you are not where you wanted to be, right? So if I wanted this to be fantasy, I want magic settings. I want a rich world. If I'm trying to write a memoir and I don't want this to be mythological in any way or fantastical in any way, then I have a big problem. I got to go back and be like, I had a dream once, and then this is the dream, right? Make it very clear that this is not the actual genre of the entire story, so that I'm on point. All right, let me catch up with chapters. We are running a special right now. Let me go ahead and grab the link. Here it is for you guys. If you are not already AutoCrit Pro members and you want to try these features as we go along, you can try the, well, I don't know what just happened with my link. You can try the story analyzer one time for free for up to 10,000 words when you upgrade to Pro. And so you can see this, see if it's a good fit for you as a free member. Becca, if you've got the link, you might want to drop it because it keeps messing up for me. But that'll at least give you the genre for, there you go, the first one. Your story starts out in a fantasy-like place, but still here on Earth. Your main character spends first 18 years there and then is kicked out into the real world, which is the mid-19th century. It is based on a Gothic story, but you don't think it is really gothic. Your best description is a love story, not romance, gone horribly wrong. Mm. So more, if it's current day and it's an urban setting, then it could be an urban fantasy. Otherwise, it could be contemporary fantasy. It could be low fantasy, which is where it happens in our world with very limited magic as well. Um, thank you, Rainey. So typically the story analyzer is pro only. You get the one free use of up to 10,000 words. Now, if you look here, you see that this book is 100,000 words long. This is the version that I was getting ready to publish. I was able to run the entire book through here, and it took the analyzer, scroll back up. It took the analyzer about 4.5 minutes to run. So go make a pot of coffee and come back. It should be run. Now, if you have any issues running the analyzer, there's a little help bubble on the bottom right-hand corner. You can click to chat with our team anytime. It can handle as many chapters as you want, but the more chapters you have, the slower it's going to go. So try to stick with just standard chapters. I don't recommend running individual scenes through it as chapters and having a whole bunch because it's got to fill out all the fields every single time. So try to get your chapters together. This book's 100,000 words long, and I think I ended at 17 chapters. Yeah, 17 chapters. The biggest book I've ever put through is 257,000 words long. It was 47 chapters. So I've never gone over 47 chapters. And that one took about 10 to 13 minutes to run. And then that was it. And you save and you don't have to rerun it every time you go in. It's just still there for you. Every chapter has to be between 200 and 10,000 words to run, but you can have as many as you'd like. And then, of course, make sure you're only running the book through it. Don't throw the system off and your analysis off by having anything in front of your actual text. Save your title pages and all that for once the analyzer is finished running, and then save any ending for after it has run so it doesn't confuse anything in your results. And you don't have to wait till it's a finished book. If you have a book in progress right now and you're like, I really wish I knew what I was supposed to be doing with this, I really wish I knew what to build out, you could go ahead and run it on what you have. Run the overall and it'll tell you what it reads like right now. And then if, for example, I'm a pantser and I'm stuck and maybe I want to reverse outline the process a little bit. I want to go back, plug in the beats, the story points that I already have, and minimize my chat bubble. I'm going to go to the planning tab, go to fiction story builder, go to the beat sheets here and say, okay, I know that this is a mystery now. So I'm going to click mystery, or I know that I want to make this piece of romance. I have a fantasy. I want it to be a romance. I'm going to click romance here. And I'm going to say, okay, there's that meet cute term that I talked about earlier. And here's a little bubble to remind me what it means. They should have a unique meeting with them, even if it's not a fall in love meeting. And I can start planning out. This is what's missing. So I can say missing. And then I have this piece, and then I have this piece. I can work in those missing pieces and bring the story together and hopefully get past any walls that I'm stuck on. Because now I know that this is what's wrong based on the genre expectations, that it just thinks it's a regular character-focused fantasy. Character-focused stories go here. Thrillers, suspense, my plot-centered people, here's your plot-centered beat sheet. So go down this one. Find the one that works for what you're going for, and you can do your outlining sort of a little bit in reverse that way if you need to. And yes, there is nonfiction. So I'm going to show you both. Here's the nonfiction builder. So you go to your nonfiction builder. There's an outline for that too. And you could say, okay, I know now that I want my autobiographical creative nonfiction to be a creative nonfiction. So instead of using what people would look for in a fantasy, I'm going to look for things in the narrative nonfiction department. So I'm going to click narrative nonfiction. Narrative and historical share similar beats, so they're lumped together here. And you're going to go through and fill in What is the introduction to the story? Tell us about the character we're following. Whose story is this? Why should I care? That's number 2. Who is telling the story? Is this from a first person point of view? Why do we trust what they say about this person? What's the context of our story? And then get into the story itself. What's the hook? Show us the theme that we're going to follow. Everybody's life is convoluted, but there's a central theme if you're writing it in a book form. What is that theme? You're going to state that, show us that, and then get us into their story with the inciting incident. So you've got these available for you here. You've got self-help here. We've got ones for short stories in here, and these are under the planning tab under the builders. So first you're on your analysis. That's going to show you your current nonfiction genre or fiction genre. Then take that, if you're using this to get unstuck, and go into your builders for your brainstorming. Okay. Now we're going to go into a couple last points, and then we're going to wrap up and take questions here. The last thing I want to point out when it comes to the editing side, once you know your genre, it's easier for you to run your line and copy edits and get closer to the feel for the story that you're writing, right? So mine is fantasy, but we also have nonfiction. If you go in here and you say, hey, I'm the one writing the autobiography, you can go to biography and memoir. You can go in here and say, I'm writing a business book. Go in here and click on business. You're writing a thriller, a romance. Once you find your primary genre, that primary level should be here, and it should mirror pretty closely what you saw on the 2-page part from Amazon, young adult and things like that. If you're writing children's, just like on Amazon, you're going to have to pick the primary genre that it's going to be judged by, and then make some notes that are going to shift into young adult. So you're going to pick that here. And then you can start running these reports and say, okay, how many long sentences, how long paragraphs should I have in a book this size, right? And so it's going to say, typically in a fantasy book, paragraphs are this many words long, and yours are about this long. Having some that are shorter than usual means it's going to read fast-paced and maybe a little rushed. Having some that are faster than normal are going to be fast-paced or slow-paced. If yours are really long and the average is in the middle, yours could read like a slow book or a boring book. And it's not because of the content, solely because of how you broke it out. So if you're interested in knowing more about the editing side and using those reports, we do have an entire series that you can watch for free. It's on YouTube and in AutoCrit. It's called AutoCrit 101. And that series breaks you down every single level of editing: developmental, line, copy, and formatting and blurbs and synopsis, and walks you through every single stage of the AutoCrit process using the genre that you've narrowed down today. So remember, if you have a whole lot of on-the-page description, on-the-page gore, on-the-page explicit sex, you probably have an adult piece. Going back to our age group questions, if it's a little more reined in, it's on the page, but it's fade to black or it's nondescript, maybe you have YA, and then children's, you're going to be just sort of glossed over. If you think about the battle in the Hobbit book, it doesn't really get very gory and dark, but if you read Lord of the Rings, those battles read very differently, even though they do try to lighten things up. All right. So let me get to questions. I know we are right at the hour, so if you do have to jump, that's fine. Thank you all for being here so much, but I'm going to stay on and try to answer the questions that I can for you guys. And I do offer story doctor sessions here at AutoCrit. So if you ever want to chat with me about working through your book's genre or how to place it from a marketing perspective, that would be a good place to do it. So one of the questions that we got right at the start of the event was about working in magical realism versus fantasy. Magical realism is a genre, like a subgenre in a lot of categories on Amazon. You can check, but basically magical realism is a breath of supernatural, is how I like to think about it, in an otherwise very natural world. Fantasy is going to have a clearly defined magic system. We're not going to be supposing. It's not going to be a hint that there could be a guardian angel saving you, that you have really good luck. things like that, it's going to be very plain. This is clear magic, clear fantastical phenomenon. And again, go back to the other fantasy elements. Do you have fantasy creatures, fantasy setting, fantasy hierarchy? Is this in our world? What else is it that makes it fantasy? Kids who gain powers after being hit by lightning, but there are also dragons, magic, ghosts, and demons. Definitely fantasy, 100%. Sold me on dragons. Oxford commas. What's the difference between supernatural and paranormal? Thank you, Becca, for sharing. Paranormal genre includes creatures like zombies, werewolves, aliens, and ghosts, as well as the phenomena like telepathy, time travel. Supernatural refers to phenomena that happens forever outside the realm of scientific explanation. God, the afterlife, the soul. Should your prologue say chapter one? I list it as whatever I have. I don't list it as chapter one, but I do highlight it and then click the plus sign at the top and add it with whatever it was labeled. So mine that you just saw in the example said opening. So I highlighted the word opening and clicked the plus sign and it saved it as an opening. I also sometimes label them with things. I hesitate to call mine prologues though, because they're not usually more than 2 or 3 pages and it's more of just a hook on the front, an Easter egg for people who like them and who actually care enough to read them. Should we save as a docx file or text file before uploading to strip out docx controls? Marilyn, what I would do is a docx if you can, a plain text docx file. Something else you can do if you're not sure if you got all your formatting out before you get into here is try to upload the file into AutoCrit. If the file won't upload when you click upload, then it might have elements of formatting in it that still need to come out of it. So you can chat with our support team and we'll help if you need us. Is the genre fiction analyzer available for the free AutoCrit user? It's that one time for free. Yes, there's still monthly and annual too. Yeah. So the promo we're doing is $15 for your first month of a monthly membership today, but there's annual memberships as well, and occasionally a lifetime one. Yeah, thank you so much. Yours 235,000 words and you haven't had a problem so far. That's great. You have a project with chapters as separate files. Aha! Evelyn, if you are still on, I don't know if you're still on or not. Drop me a chat real quick if you're here, because my fellow past scriveners, okay, you do not have to upload every single one individually like that. Let me share back to AutoCrit for a second. Wish this had been here when I came to AutoCrit 6 years ago after using Scrivener. But this is new this year and I love it and it saves so much time. If you have files and they are saved outside of AutoCrit in multiple, like if you have chapters saved in multiple files, when you click upload a file, you can click in this gray drag and drop your file here or click select to select it box. That is going to open a window and you can hold down on your keyboard Control Shift to highlight all the files and drop them in at one time. And when you do that, it will prompt you to say, do you want these combined into one file? And you say yes. As long as you do that, when you open the file back up, it might be a little out of order depending on how you had your file saved, but you can drag and drop files in the chapters drop down now. So you can reorder them there, but it will compile them all into a file just with that one click. So you could go in here, and if it accidentally had 10 way up here by 2, then you drag it back down after 9 to sort it out. If you've already started working in AutoCrit, you can go all the way to the end, click down here, and hit the import button. And then either choose your files if you have them all saved individually here in AutoCrit, and you can just click this import button over and over to import them one at a time. You don't have to reload this every single time. Or click the upload, which will bring back that box. Click it, do that control shift highlights everything from the first file to the last file you clicked, and drag it all into here. And it'll combine it that way for you as well. So it just hopefully will save you a little bit of time. Let's see here. If you have strong sex scenes, does that mean your book is erotica? Not necessarily. It depends on how much of a plot you have and how much time in the book is spent on sex. What is the purpose of the book, right? If the purpose of the book is solely to get them from one sex scene to another, then it's probably more erotica. I don't know if Becca, you chipped in. Yeah. And if it's about their relationship, it's not just about showing the sex on the page, then it could be an erotic romance, which is fine. And AutoCrit does not censor our members' work. So we welcome authors. We have BDSM authors in here, all that. The analyzer will tell you trends based on the current genre. So if you tried to put in a book that's like, say, new adult BDSM, it might say that in new adult, that it's a little bit of a risk to put that out if you're going to traditionally publish. But that doesn't mean that you can't write it or that we're saying you don't need to write it. So there's that. To add a chapter feature, do they have to be in order? No. Scroll back up, trying to catch all your great questions.
While you're scrolling, Catherine, I did put in the chat that if you have not joined Novel 90 yet, please consider joining it. We are all, Catherine, Daniel, and I are the coaches for our team Pantser, Plancer, and Planner. And we also have a text line that you can text us questions. So if you're writing and something comes up, you can text us that directly and we do answer. These are manned by us. It's not a robot. So I put that text line in there. Please use the hashtags depending on what team you're on so that you know it helps us channel who gets what, but we all answer them. So that's another opportunity if you need that.
Robin, your question about minimum words in chapters, the analyzer has to have at least 200 words or it can't run. But you can have a short story where it's literally that's all you've got is an excerpt of 250 words and it'll still run for you. So as long as every single chapter is between 200 and 10,000 words, you can have as many or as few chapters as you want. If you don't have a chapter and it's under 10,000 words, when you click the analyzer, it'll say, there's no chapters. Is this a short story? And you just click yes. And it'll run that way for you. How would you market a trope for your readers looking specifically for a trope you wrote? There's a couple different ways to do this. We can't get really into keywords today, but another aspect of setting your book up with a retailer is putting in keywords. And keywords are where you're going to put a lot of those tropes. So some of my keywords last year were things like adult fantasy romance books that don't have happy endings. You guys are welcome. No, it's like those are very specific things. Books where the main character dies. Dark fantasy books where no pets are injured. And you might think, oh, this is silly, but people really care about that stuff, right? And so you find what tropes you serve and you can put those in keywords. And then when a reader searches for that keyword in Amazon or on Apple Books or wherever, your book could be one of the ones that pops up because it has that keyword loaded into it. So that's one place. And then on your actual reader facing marketing, your social media pages, when you talk about the tropes in your book, and things about your story, your ads and stuff like that. Things like touch her and die. I think Becca, you said that too. Enemies to lovers and all that. Those are not going to be genres, but they're great tropes.
And be blatant about it. Know what your tropes are and be aggressive about it when you're marketing. People are looking for that trope. So they will take a chance on your book if you tell them it's in there.
How much violence and graphic can you take a young adult book to? This is going to depend on your country. If you've heard of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, it has a lot of graphic content in it in the US version, but if you go buy the UK version, which has a whole different cover and everything, if you go buy the UK version, you will notice some content is changed. And that is because there's a higher level of censorship in the UK about what can be told in a young adult tale. So I would look at your target country and then say, how graphic does it have to be to get the point across? You typically never see on the page sex in a young adult, like graphic on the page sex, or very little profanity. If it's in the US, it's going to be no profanity at all, pretty much in the UK. Gore, you can have a little gore. Hunger Games 3 is young adult, the book, and the book has a heavy dose of gore, but we don't talk about people's entrails slipping out or anything like that. It's more just the way they die leaves you knowing it would have been so graphic, right? And what they did with the creatures that they created from past contestants and stuff is pretty pretty dark, even for young adult. You're writing, okay, we talked about that one. Coming of age is typically a young adult theme. New adult shifts from I know who I am to shifts with I now know who I am, but I don't know my place in this world. That's more common. So coming of age, I'm growing up. I'm grown up now and new adult, but I feel lost. Now that I know who I am, I don't know my purpose. I don't know my direction. So to say, I'm uncomfortable being myself. So it's giving yourself permission to be you, finding your clan, finding your tribe, finding people who accept you for who you are and not finding out who you are. There's subtle differences in storylines there. And then really becoming that adult, right? And being able to shift into the mentor role, the guide role by the end. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. Oh, and you do have to have a free account. As long as you're logged into your account, it should work for you. If not, hit the bubble for us and we'll help there. But as long as you're signed into your free AutoCrit account, it should still work for that one use. The only time it wouldn't is if you've run it in the past. It's not going to let you come back and run it a second time. You changed yours because of AutoCrit members. Don't kill the dog. Guys, there better be a really good reason for the dog to die in most genres. Okay. Is there anything I'm missing, Becca?
I don't think so. I think we got everything.
Okay. All right. So if you are watching the replay and we couldn't get your question, if I missed your question today, feel free to hit that help bubble again. Send us our questions. We're happy to answer whatever you'd like to share our way. But thank you all so much for being here, for using AutoCrit, for being part of Novel 90 Challenge. We are so excited for you guys to finish your novels with us this year. So we'll hope to see you around the community and in the chats. Bye, everybody.
Bye.